Stephanie with Journey to Your Haven again. This is the third part of the series called The End. So after I left my previous relationship, I left with my children. We packed up boxes with my dad and my brothers overnight to get away from an abusive relationship that I was in. And so after I left this apartment, it was a nice apartment. It had 2 bedrooms, a den, a very spacious living room and dining room, and 2 bathrooms in a nice area. And I left this apartment. I moved into an older home with my brother that my loving, diligent grandma had left to her children. There were 2 homes on the same block, and I was blessed enough to be there with my family and with my brother. And as God would have it, right away, God opened up the door when I had 4 months left on my lease for me to be able to sublease my apartment to 2 brothers. So at first I tried to sublease my apartment, and it was very well priced and it was in a good area, and I couldn't get anybody to sublease it. And I just started getting so much fear and anxiety because of it. And I remember feeling a word in my heart to change the listing on Craigslist. And so what I did is I went in and I changed a couple words around, a couple things around in the listing on Craigslist. And all of a sudden I started getting responses. But one of those responses was 2 brothers that really needed to move. And the gentleman went in and did the application. He'd never even seen the apartment before. And because I had decided to go in the right direction, God began to open up doors for me. So that was the first door that God opened. The second door was being able to live in the second house that my grandmother owned with my brother right after he had cleaned it out. Goodness gracious, here come me and my kids filling it up with boxes and totes and us and all of our things. But my brother was gracious to us. He was willing to be a part of the rebuilding process. And so that is a huge blessing to have those people in your life. If you decide to go in the right direction and do the right thing, God will be there with you and he will start opening up doors. So those are the first 2 doors that were open for me and my children. First of all, being able to sublease the apartment, and second of all, being able to live in a home with our family and a place that was not convenient, was not comfortable, but was the best place for us at that time. And when I say it wasn't comfortable, it's because we lived and we slept on couches and in a dusty little house, and sometimes the plumbing didn't work, and sometimes the heat didn't work correctly. And it was plush and nice where I used to live, and I had my own room, and my kids had their own rooms, and they had their own beds, and there was never problems with the water or different things like that. And so what is a trick of the enemy is to get you not to want to give up something that seems perfect and nice and convenient and comfortable for something that's not, in order to get to the next level, in order to move forward, in order to be in a better situation. Because on the outside, what I had previously was better, but in reality and in spiritually, that was not a better place for me, even though it was more comfortable. And so I'm telling you right now that you are going to be inconvenienced, and it is not going to always be comfortable. I remember waking up on those couches, my body hurt. You know what I'm saying? All of my children and me sniffling and everything else because those were cotton couches. Our skin being irritated by it. We're all allergic to cotton. So having stuffed noses, getting sick more often because it was an older home. There were so many different uncomfortable situations, so many different inconveniences, but that was the best place. That was the place that God provided for us at that particular time. Hands down, that's what it was. And that's what I had to be willing to do for a season. Not forever, for a season. Every season changes. And so after that happened, another thing I was so concerned about when I was with my ex, because he watched our children when I went to work, is who was going to take care of my children when I was at work. And if you're a parent, you know how stressful and how difficult that can be when you don't know who is going to care for your children. And so God was so gracious and so loving and so good to open up the door where my cousin, who is a fantastic mother, who really cares about children, who's really good with children, who pays attention to them and learns them, she was able to take care of my daughter and also my son during the summer. And it was so beautiful what she did for me and my children. And I always pray that God blesses her abundantly, and every single person that was a part of my rebuilding journey, that he just blesses them abundantly. And so once again, that was a good place for my children, the best place for them to be. But it was not convenient, because I was in a place of being humbled, of being broken down and being rebuilt. And not just me, but my kids as well. They had to go through the process as well. Whoever you're connected to, when you go through the process, they go through it with you. There's nothing you can do. There's no shortcuts, but you have to do it. You have to go forward, and I promise you that it will be worth it. And so I lived 25 plus minutes away from where my cousin lived, where I would drop my kids off to be cared for. And it was very inconvenient, and that is if it was good weather. If it was bad weather, it was longer. So I would drive from the city I was in Denver, all the way out to Aurora, back down to Denver to work, back out to Aurora to get my children, back down to Denver to go to sleep. And I did that consistently 5 days a week for over 6 months. No, it wasn't convenient. And yes, sometimes I would get frustrated in traffic and I'd be like, go, what are you doing? Of course, I learned that when my daughter started saying that. But nonetheless, it was one of the best things that I could have ever done, because I was able to pray. I was able to worship. I was able to listen to sermons and teachings to help me with the different areas in my life where I was broken. It was one of the best things that ever happened to me. No, it wasn't a convenient part, but it was a necessary part of the journey to getting where I needed to be. And then the last thing that I want to share with you is another place that me and my children lived for 2 months before we bought our home. And where that was with another family member, a very dear sister of mine and her 2 sons. And it was crazy because one of her sons, he's so loving and kind, he gave up his room for my 2 children, and they were on a bunk bed. They had a bed. Yes, I was still on the couch, but it was a better environment. It was in the same city that my cousin lived in, so I didn't have to do as much traveling back and forth. The same city where I was going to buy a home, and just a better home, a better environment. And I learned so much from being there with her and her children. I learned how to ask my kids how their day was and see how they were doing, how to communicate better, and how to share things that were bothering me, and how to trust God and overcome situations when I felt like there was no way out. And that's one of the struggles I had with buying my new home. There were so many obstacles, and even the realtor, who had been a realtor for over 20 years, said the deal with buying my house was one of the worst deals, the most difficult deals she's ever done, one of the top 5 in over 20 years of being a realtor. And so it was difficult, but my sister was there to tell me, do you trust God? Are you going to keep going forward? Are you going to be discouraged? Or are you just going to praise God and thank Him no matter what it looks like? So there were so many different lessons and things I learned through being uncomfortable and being inconvenienced. And eventually, though, God was so gracious and so good to bless us with a 5-bedroom house. And more than that, we had His presence back. We had peace. We had a nice place. A place that I would have never imagined that I would receive because of my willingness to trust God, to believe Him, to be uncomfortable, to be inconvenient, to tell the truth, and to go forward. And so I want to encourage you to do the same thing. I know your journey is not going to be exactly like mine, but I'm telling you that a part of the journey is being uncomfortable and inconvenienced, and that's the best thing that can happen to you. Make sure you learn the lessons. Make sure that you learn the lessons during that point in time. Thank you so much for listening. Take care, and I'm praying for you.